The weight of silence. A man with broken ribs stood at the train platform, holding a wooden toy airplane against the glass, while his son, a son he might not have, sat inside the departing carriage. 30 years of silence had led to this moment. And behind it all was a woman he'd never met, and a secret that would rewrite everything he thought he knew about his own life. 13 hours earlier, the evening had been nothing but blue light and old coffee rings. Elias sat at the circular oak table, his hunched back casting a long shadow against the peeling yellow wallpaper. The kitchen smelled of stale coffee and something else. Something rotten in the back of the refrigerator that he hadn't bothered to find. The low hum of the old appliance filled the silence like a persistent, tired heartbeat. His weathered right hand gripped the crumpled envelope. Blue veins rose from his skin like branches, and age spots dotted his knuckles like the first signs of rot. The paper crinkled loudly in the quiet room as his fingers trembled. The return address was clear. 402 Redwood Dr. The stamp was standard, a forever stamp, slightly crooked as if placed by someone who didn't care how it looked. He pulled out the single sheet of lined notebook paper. The handwriting was jagged and aggressive, written by someone who had pressed the pen hard into the fiber, as if trying to hurt the paper itself. Through his wire-rimmed glasses, Elias read the words. "Don't come to the ceremony. Your presence isn't an apology, it's a reminder of what's missing." "A reminder," Elias whispered, his voice breaking over the two syllables. He let the letter fall from his fingers. It drifted down slowly, floating like something already dead, landing next to a framed photograph on the table. The silver picture frame held a Polaroid photo, faded and warped at the edges. In it, a young boy, Julian, Elias's son, held a broken wooden airplane. His face was contorted with tears. His mouth was open in a wail. And next to him, younger Elias looked away. His body turned toward the toolbox in the corner, his attention on anything but the crying child. Elias stared at the photograph for a long time. Then he stood up abruptly, the chair screeching against the linoleum floor with a sound like something dying. He reached for the bottle on the counter. It was brown glass, half empty or perhaps half full. He'd stopped counting which. The label was torn. Old Highland Whiskey. He poured 2 fingers into a white porcelain cup with a brown coffee ring permanently stained into the ceramic. The whiskey burned. The rusty anchor bar was the kind of place where the light was always wrong, and the air always thick with something that wasn't quite smoke anymore. It was the ghost of smoke. The memory of every cigarette ever lit there, layered into the wood and fabric like a second skin. Elias leaned against the scarred wooden bar, his coat sleeve damp with spilled beer. The neon open sign outside flickered with a failing heartbeat, casting colors that had no names. The jukebox was playing a low blues track, something in a minor key that made Elias think of funerals. Glass clinked against glass somewhere to his right. 2 stools away sat a large man in a grease-stained trucker hat. The hat was the color of mud, and it had the kind of stains that suggested it had never been washed. The man's hands were enormous, thick fingers with nails that looked like they'd been worked on with a file made of sandpaper. He was looking at something Elias had placed on the bar. The Polaroid. The one with Julian and the broken airplane. The large man pointed, his thick finger coming down on the photograph like a hammer. He laughed. Not a laugh, exactly, but a raspy exhalation from deep in his chest that sounded like tires rolling over gravel. "Kid looks miserable," the man said, his voice loud enough to draw glances from other patrons. "Guess the apple doesn't fall far from the rotten tree, huh, Elias?" The bar seemed to tilt. Elias's jaw tightened so hard that his molars ached. He lunged across the gap between them, grabbing the man's denim jacket with both hands. The fabric was stiff under his fingers, crusted with something that might have been grease or might have been worse. A bar stool toppled over with a crash. The large man swung a heavy fist. Elias saw it coming and tried to move, but his reflexes were 30 years out of practice. The fist connected with Elias's ribs, and the air exploded out of his lungs. He gasped, a high-pitched sound like an animal caught in a trap, and his body doubled over. His knees buckled. He hit the floor hard, landing on all fours in the sawdust and discarded peanut shells. Spilled beer soaked into the shoulder of his coat, making it cold and heavy. Elias grabbed a heavy glass ashtray from the floor. It had a green tint, and inside it were the remnants of cigarettes that had been smoked hours ago. He swung it wildly. The ashtray connected with the large man's shin. The man bellowed in pain, a sound like a wounded animal. Cigarette ash exploded into the air like gray snow, floating down over both of them. The bartender appeared from behind the counter like a magician, vaulting over it with surprising athleticism. He grabbed Elias's arms. Elias struggled, but he had nothing left. He was thrown toward the door, his boots dragging on the floor, leaving dark streaks in the sawdust. The heavy wooden door swung open. He fell onto the sidewalk. The rain hit him like a shock of cold water, shocking his system back into awareness. His ribs were screaming. His ribs were screaming, and his ear was ringing, and his lip was bleeding, the blood mixing with the rainwater and running down his chin. He pushed himself up with his hands, waiting for the shaking to stop. It didn't stop. The black sedan was parked across the street. The windshield wipers were on, moving back and forth with a rhythmic swish thump that seemed to mock the chaos that had just ended. Elias looked up at the car through the rain. For a moment, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. But then he saw her. A woman sat behind the wheel. In the brief moment when the passing headlights illuminated the interior, Elias could see her watching him with an expression of complete calm. She held a digital voice recorder in her hand, a Sony model, professional grade. The red light was on. The recording indicator was glowing like a small eye, watching, always watching. The car door opened. A woman stepped out, holding a large black umbrella. She was tall, with the kind of posture that suggested she'd been trained to command attention. She wore a sharp beige trench coat, the kind that looked expensive the way certain things just do. There's a particular quality to the fabric that announces its price. Her heels clicked on the wet pavement as she walked toward him, the sound precise and deliberate. The light from the bar sign turned her coat a neon pink. For a moment, she looked like she was walking through a different world entirely. She reached Elias and held the umbrella over him. The rain stopped drumming on his head, and suddenly the world was quieter. She pulled a folder from under her arm. The folder was manila, the kind used by professionals and bureaucrats. A label on the front read, in careful typeface, Case 402, Julian. Below that, in handwritten script, psychological evaluation. Elias stared at the label. "I'm not the police, Elias," the woman said. Her voice was even, authoritative, the voice of someone used to being believed. "I'm the person Julian pays to listen to him, and he's been talking about you for 20 years. Elias looked at the folder. Then he looked at the woman's face. She was younger than him by maybe 15 years, maybe more. Her features were sharp, analytical. There was no pity in her expression. There was no judgment either. There was only the steady gaze of someone documenting a fact. "What's your name?" Elias asked. "Mara," she said. A drop of rain fell from the umbrella onto the folder, landing directly on the word evaluation. Elias watched it slide down the surface of the paper, leaving a small trail of water. 3 days later, at midnight, Elias jemmyed the window frame of Mara's office with a flathead screwdriver. The wood splinters came away narrow and white. The metal latch put up a brief resistance before surrendering. His breath fogged up the glass as he leaned against it, testing the frame to make sure it would hold his weight. It did. He climbed inside. The office smelled of lavender and old books. There was a leather armchair in one corner, worn smooth at the armrests from years of people sitting in it, talking about their traumas. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes that looked heavy with knowledge. Elias shined a penlight across the filing cabinets. The beam danced across labels marked AM and NZ. He was reaching for the second cabinet when a shadow moved behind the frosted glass of the office door. The handle turned. The door opened with a heavy click. A man in a balaclava entered, holding a crowbar. Black steel, battered from use. The man's frame was bulky, threatening. His presence filled the office like smoke. For a moment, the two of them stood frozen, each registering the presence of an intruder. Then the man lunged. Elias threw a heavy glass paperweight at him. The paperweight was shaped like a pyramid, clear with something suspended inside it, maybe a fossil, maybe something else. The thief ducked, and the paperweight flew past his head. It hit the window and shattered. The explosion of glass was so loud, it seemed impossible that something so small could make so much noise. The thief swung the crowbar in a wide arc. Elias felt the wind move past his face. He grabbed a metal ruler from the desk and used it to parry the next swing. The crowbar and the ruler connected with a clang that seemed to echo through the building. They grappled. The thief was stronger, but Elias was desperate. The thief slammed Elias against the filing cabinet. The impact knocked the wind out of him for a second. But in that second, Elias used his knee to strike the thief's groin. The thief made a high-pitched wheeze, a sound like air escaping a punctured balloon. His grip loosened. Elias broke free. Files were spilling out of an open drawer, cascading down like a waterfall of paper. Individual sheets drifted through the air. Elias grabbed a handful of them, the ones with Julian's name printed across the top. The thief swung the crowbar again, smashing the desk lamp. The green glass shade shattered, and electrical sparks flew in the dark like tiny orange stars. The light from the arc illuminated the thief's face for a second, just long enough for Elias to see the rage there. Elias ran toward the window. He leaped out into the alley below. For a moment that felt longer than a moment. There was nothing but falling. Then he landed hard on some cardboard boxes stacked against the dumpster. The impact knocked the breath out of him, but the boxes absorbed most of the impact. He clutched the folder to his chest and looked up at the broken window. The thief didn't follow. Above, in the window frame, there was just darkness. A single piece of paper from the file escaped from Elias's grip and caught in the wind, floating upward like a messenger carrying news to someone who didn't want to hear it. The public library was brightly lit, white fluorescent lights that made everything look like a medical facility. Dr. Aris sat across from Elias at a long wooden table. Her hair was gray, pulled back severely from her face, and her eyes were sharp. The eyes of someone trained to see what people were hiding. The stolen folder was open between them. Elias had a bandage on his forehead. The cut beneath it throbbed with a dull, persistent pain. "This transcript here," Dr. Aris said, tapping a finger on a specific page. "This was from a session about 3 months ago. Julian was talking about his childhood, specifically about a moment when he brought you something he'd built himself. A toy airplane." Elias's chest tightened. Dr. Aris pointed to a handwritten note in the margin of the transcript. The handwriting was small and precise. Funds provided by GS. Keep Elias away. This wasn't just therapy, Elias, Dr. Aris said, and her voice was grave. This was a paid strategy to erase you. Someone paid for 300 hours of therapy specifically designed to distance your son from you. And look who signed the checks. She pointed to the initials. GS. Elias pulled a gold pocket watch from his pocket. The metal was warm from his body heat. On the back, an engraving read, "To Gabe Stone, for 30 years of brotherhood." Elias stared at the initials on the paper. Then he stared at the initials on the watch. They were the same. The watch continued to tick. The sound filled the library like a drum. Your best friend has been financing your son's hatred of you, Dr. Aris said softly. He's been paying to erase you from Julian's life. The library clock chimed once. A single note, clear and pure, echoing through the silence. The train station was bright and harsh under the afternoon sun. Elias stood by a digital arrivals departures board. The lines of his palms were dark with dried blood. He tucked the folder under his arm and started to walk through the crowd. He moved fast, cutting through a group of school kids in yellow vests, pushing past a woman with a stroller, keeping his eyes on Julian's navy coat. The station stairwell was concrete and echoing. Elias entered from the left side. He was halfway up when he saw him. Gabe Stone stood on the landing above, blocking the way forward. Gabe was wearing a tailored charcoal suit, the kind that costs more than most people's car payments. The suit was perfectly fitted to his frame, which was tall and broad. His shoes were leather, shiny, polished to a mirror finish. They reflected the light from a small square window set into the concrete wall. Gabe moved down 3 steps. He held out a hand, palm up, in a gesture that was simultaneously peaceful and threatening. He shook his head slowly. "Turn back, Elias," Gabe said. His voice was cold and flat, the voice of someone who had stopped feeling anything a long time ago. "You've done enough damage. He's happy now because you aren't there." Elias tried to push past. Gabe grabbed him by the collar. There was a moment of resistance, the fabric pulling tight against Elias's neck. Then Gabe slammed him against the concrete wall. The impact made a sickening thump that echoed through the stairwell. Elias's head rang like a bell. His eyes rolled back for a second, and he saw only white. Dust fell from the ceiling, shaken loose by the impact. Elias swung the manila folder like a blade. The edge of it connected with Gabe's nose. There was a sound like wet wood breaking, and then blood. Bright red blood sprayed onto Gabe's white shirt. It stained the crisp white collar, spreading like a dark flower. Gabe roared in rage. He kicked Elias in the stomach. Elias fell backward, rolling over the concrete steps. Once, twice, 3 times. His body tumbled down until he stopped at the lower landing, curled in a ball, clutching his stomach. Pain radiated through him like electricity. His glasses flew off during the fall, skidding across the floor and stopping at the edge of the stairs. Gabe stood over him, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. He looked at the blood on his hand. He looked at Elias's broken glasses. Then he spat on the floor and turned back up the stairs. The stairs were empty except for one figure. Elias, broken on the concrete, breathing hard. Elias pulled an envelope from Gabe's inner jacket pocket as they grappled. The fabric tore slightly. The envelope was cream-colored, heavy stock, the kind used for important documents. It had no stamp. On it, in handwriting that matched Gabe's precise penmanship, was written, "For Julian." Elias ripped it open. His fingers were shaking so badly that he nearly tore the contents. But inside was a document from the city genetics lab. An official header, tables of data, numbers and percentages and words that seemed to drain all meaning from the world. 99.9% paternal match, Gabriel Stone. The world didn't just tilt. It inverted. Everything that had been true became false. Everything that had been solid became liquid. Gabe saw the report in Elias's hand. His face changed. The rage evaporated, replaced by something hollow and empty. His shoulders dropped. When he spoke, his voice was different, stripped of its authority, stripped of its coldness. "I was going to tell him when he landed," Gabe said. His voice was bitter, the voice of someone tasting something poisoned. "He deserves a father who isn't you." Elias collapsed back against the wall. The DNA report fell from his fingers. The pages scattered across the concrete, individual sheets drifting like snow. The blue veins in the white space of the test results looked like rivers on a map of a country that no longer existed. Julian stood at the edge of the yellow safety line on the platform. He checked his watch. Then he looked around, his eyes scanning the crowd, searching for something he knew he wouldn't find. There was a sense of deep loneliness about him, a profound isolation that no amount of passengers could penetrate. The train approached slowly, the rails announcing its arrival with a low rumble. The track was shimmering in the heat, waves of distortion rising from the metal like ghosts. Elias watched from behind a pillar. He held the DNA report in one hand and the therapy folder in the other. He watched as Julian picked up his black suitcase. He watched as his son moved toward the open door of the train carriage. The pneumatic doors hissed as they opened, inviting him in, promising him escape. The interior of the train was dark. It looked like the mouth of something alive, ready to swallow Julian whole and carry him away to a place where no one would ever find him. The conductor shouted something unintelligible. "All aboard." Or maybe, "Last call." Elias couldn't hear the exact words. He could only hear the rhythm of it, the finality in the tone. Julian placed one foot inside the carriage. Elias closed his eyes. Inside his mind, he could see a scene from decades ago. Young Julian crying over the broken wooden airplane. Small tears running down a small face. And Elias, younger then, but no better, looking away, focusing on the toolbox, choosing to see nothing. The folder fell from his hand. It hit the ground and scattered into 1,000 pages, each one carrying a piece of Julian's pain, each one documenting a moment when Elias had chosen silence instead of presence. Validation is not about facts. It's about feelings. The words from the folder echoed in his mind. Elias's eyes opened. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something he'd been carrying for 30 years. The wooden airplane. Not the toy from the photo. No. That one was in his apartment, waiting to be fixed. This was the actual toy. The one Julian had carried with him when he was 4 years old. The one Julian had built with his own small hands and brought to his father. Elias had kept it all this time, hidden in his pocket like a secret he was ashamed of. The wings were still broken. One of them hung at an odd angle, but it was beautiful in its brokenness. It was honest. Elias sprinted across the platform. He didn't call Julian's name. Instead, he pressed the wooden airplane against the window glass. His hand was shaking. His breath was ragged. His ribs were throbbing, each breath a small agony. He stood outside Julian's window, his face pressed against the glass, the toy between them, and he waited. Julian was sitting inside, staring out the window at the crowd. His eyes were looking through the glass, not at it. Then something changed. The angle of his head shifted. His eyes focused. He saw the toy. His eyes went wide. The knowledge of it struck him like a physical blow. He stood up so fast that his bag fell off his lap, hitting the floor with a thump. He ran to the door. He jammed his arm between the closing doors. The sensors registered the obstruction, and with a bzzzt of electricity, the doors stopped. The pneumatic hiss of pressurized air filled the platform. The doors vibrated against Julian's sleeve, but they held open. Julian pushed through and stepped onto the platform. They stood 3 feet apart. Elias held out the DNA report with one hand and the wooden airplane with the other. He was crying. The tears were running down his face, mixing with sweat and the dust from the platform. His eyes were clear, though. His eyes were clear for perhaps the first time in 30 years. "I wasn't looking at you that day because I was afraid," Elias said. His voice was soft but steady, the voice of someone speaking a truth he'd never had the courage to speak before. "I was afraid of the man your mother loved before me. I was a coward, Julian. I let my fear be your silence, and I'm so sorry." Julian looked at the DNA report. He stared at the words and the numbers and the official seal. Then he looked at Elias. He didn't look surprised. He looked like someone who had always known something and was finally being told what he already understood. He looked at the wooden airplane. He took it from Elias's hand. His thumb traced the grain of the wood, running over every scratch and dent and mark that 30 years of carrying it had left. "I knew," Julian said quietly. His voice was emotional, cracking on the vowels. "I always knew Gabe was the money. But you were the voice I wanted to hear." Elias reached out and touched Julian's shoulder. For the first time in a decade, Julian didn't flinch. He leaned into the touch. He moved closer. The distance between them collapsed. The sun came out from behind a cloud. The light was bright and sudden, illuminating them both. The light caught the wooden airplane, making the grain of the wood stand out in sharp relief. The train waited, but no one boarded. 1 week later, the apartment kitchen had been transformed. The old newspapers were gone. The unwashed porcelain cups had been washed and put away. The yellow wallpaper was still peeling, but someone had started to remove it. The room was bright. It was clean. Elias and Julian sat at the oak table, which had been scrubbed clean and polished until the wood grain was visible. Between them lay the wooden airplane and the materials to repair it. Wood glue in a yellow bottle, a small metal clamp, a saw, sandpaper in various grits. Julian was carefully applying glue to the broken wing. His hands were steady. His focus was complete. Elias watched as his son worked, and for the first time, he didn't look away. He was present. He was there. "The wing needs to be held at exactly 90 degrees while the glue sets," Julian said. He wasn't talking to Elias. He was talking to himself, working through the problem out loud. "If it's off even a few degrees, the whole thing will be unbalanced." "I'll hold it," Elias said. "Tell me where." Julian showed him. They worked together, and for a while there was only the sound of the saw, the gentle snip of wood being cut, the scrape of sandpaper against wood. Small sounds, quiet sounds. But they were there. They were happening. The door opened. Mara walked in, carrying a brown paper grocery bag. Bread was sticking out of the top. She looked at Elias and Julian, bent over the table, working on the airplane, and she smiled. She set the bag down and pulled a photo from her wallet. It was very old, faded at the edges, the colors washed out from years of being exposed to light. In the photo, a younger Elias held a baby girl in his arms. The baby had the same eyes as Mara. Serious eyes, observant eyes. The caption on the back of the photo read, in faded ink, "Elias and Mara, our first home, 1992. "I told you I'd help you find your son, Dad," Mara said. Her voice was witty, warm, carrying layers of meaning that would take time to unpack. I just didn't tell you I was finding my brother, too. Elias looked at the photo. Then he looked at Mara. Then he looked at Julian, who had stopped working and was staring at his sister with dawning comprehension. Elias laughed. It was a deep, genuine sound, coming from somewhere inside him that hadn't laughed in 30 years. The sound filled the kitchen, filled the apartment, filled the space that had been so long occupied by silence. He beckoned them both to the table. They came. They sat around the small oak table, the three of them, and continued working on the airplane. The wood glue was drying clear. The grain of the wood was visible now. All the layers of growth that had made the tree what it was before it was cut down and shaped into a toy. The two wings were coming together slowly, carefully. The clamp held them in place while the glue set, solid and patient. Outside the window, the city continued its endless motion. People walked past. Cars moved through the streets. The world went on, indifferent to the transformation happening in this small kitchen. The wooden airplane sat on the table, not yet finished, but no longer broken. The sun was setting over the city skyline, turning the clouds orange and gold. The light streamed through the window and fell on the three of them, and in that moment, there was only the present. There was only the work. There was only the four of them, the father, the son, the daughter, and the airplane that had waited 30 years to be whole again. The glue continued to dry,